Chapter 18. For the next few hours, Vaggie split her time between actually taking notes and making a map of the manor she could use for later. It was all she could do to not nod off during Rosie's lecture. It was boring, sexist, and condescending, but mostly boring. Thankfully, Rosie wrote the last note on the chalkboard for Vaggie to write down and put down her chalk. "All right, Vaggie, are you ready to put some of this etiquette into practice?" Rosie asked in an annoyingly merry tone. "I don't have a choice. Do I?" Vaggie replied. "No, now come along, dear," Rosie said, walking to the door. "Let's powder our noses and go have some lunch." Vaggie groaned under her breath, picked up her pen and notebook, and reluctantly followed her teacher. After powdering their noses and demonstrating some completely unnecessary bathroom etiquette, Rosie led Vaggie to a pristine and properly set lunch table in yet another tea room that Vaggie had never seen before. This tea room was much like the previous one, with the same type of furniture but set in a larger room with teal wallpaper and a large window looking over the yard and the alluring forest just beyond it that Vaggie had nearly escaped into the other day. Vaggie made herself away from the forest out the window and glared at Rosie as the two entered the room. Rosie and Alastor had chosen this room on purpose. "How many tea rooms does one man need?" Vaggie muttered under her breath to distract herself from her anger. "A powerful man like Alastor can afford many luxuries," Rosie said, gently pushing Vaggie ahead of her. "Now, please do sit down in the seat over there so we can begin our lunch." As soon as Vaggie sat down in the chair, Rosie commanded, "Now, show me your hands." Vaggie looked at Rosie in confusion and put her hands in front of her. Rosie pulled out a small bottle of hand sanitizer and squirted some of its contents into Vaggie's hands. "Remember, Vaggie," Rosie said. "A proper lady is always clean." Vaggie rubbed her hands together without making any fuss as Rosie squirted some of the sanitizer into her hands and took her seat as well. "All right, Vaggie," Rosie said. "Before we eat, what do we do first?" "What do you mean?" Vaggie asked confusedly. "What do you do first when you enter a luncheon?" Rosie asked in annoyance. "My dear, did you listen to my lecture?" "But you said so much. It's so hard to remember," Vaggie retorted. "Say hi?" "Oh, goodness, no," Rosie replied with a disapproving head shake. "You walk up to your guest with the perfect posture and balance. Then, you politely introduce yourself." "Isn't that what I just said?" Vaggie asked. "No, you do not say hi like some uncultured swine," Rosie said snobbishly. "But we already know each other," Vaggie protested. "Practice, my dear," Rosie replied with a smile. Vaggie rolled her eyes, stood up in her chair leaving the pen and notebook on her chair, walked over to Rosie, extended her hand to shake, and said, "Hello. I am Vaggie, the manager of the Happy Hotel. It's nice to meet you." Rosie said, shaking her finger at Vaggie's face. "You are not the manager of the Hazbin Hotel anymore." "Yes, I am," Vaggie argued. "I help Charlie manage the hotel. That's my job." "That was your job. It's not your job anymore." "What am I then?" "You are the radio demon's betrothed." "No, I'm not. I'm not introducing myself that way." "Unfortunately, dear, that is how you are to introduce yourself to your guests," Rosie said calmly and matter-of-factly. "Now, would you like to try that again?" Vaggie glared at Rosie and said, "Sure. Hello. I'm Vaggie, the radio demon's sex slave. It's nice to meet you." Rosie gasped in shock and said, "No. No. No. That will simply not do at all." "But that's the truth," Vaggie said, crossing her arms. "Isn't it?" "Now, dear, you're to be Alastor's wife, not his sex slave," Rosie chided. "That's what he wants me to be," Vaggie snarled. "I found out about the deal he made with my Aztec ancestor yesterday. We met him at the aquarium. The bastard told me that in exchange for my hand in marriage and at least 8 kids he would help Alastor pay his debt. Your friend took me for that reason alone. He doesn't actually love me. You don't have to lie. Vaggie, you're being ridiculous, Rosie said with a scowl. That's why men usually took women in your time. Isn't it? Marriage was ideally for love, but it was mostly for status and obligation. Exactly. Not love. Oh, Vaggie. Alastor didn't ask Titok to help him with his debt when he asked for your hand. Titok offered that all on his own. And that makes it better? Vaggie, the food is getting cold, Rosie said with a sigh. I suggest you introduce yourself properly or I will have to call Alastor. Vaggie sighed in defeat and said, Hello, I'm Vaggie. It's nice to meet you. Then, she turned around and returned to her chair. Rosie smiled contentedly and said, Good. Now, back straight, shoulders set, feet flat on the floor. Vaggie silently did all that Rosie asked. Good work, Rosie said. Now, what's next? We eat, Vaggie replied, grabbing a small sandwich from the tray on the table and sitting back in her chair as she began to take bites out of the sandwich. Smack. A long ruler reached across the table, slapping Vaggie's hand and causing her to drop the sandwich on her plate. Hey! Vaggie yelled angrily. What was that for? Proper ladies do not gorge themselves, Rosie replied calmly while menacingly slapping the ruler against her hand. Take smaller bites and use cutlery if you need to. Cutlery? Vaggie replied incredulously while rubbing her sore hand. For a sandwich? Yes, Rosie said, snapping her fingers and causing her ruler to disappear. Also, you must ask a servant to pass the plates to you. You never reach for your food. Vaggie looked to her left and to her right and asked, What servant? Rosie picked up her service bell and gave it a ring. One of her penguin familiars came waddling in. Vaggie simply blinked at the penguin coming in. The penguin picked up the plate of sandwiches and the pitcher of water and walked over to Rosie, who promptly allowed herself to be served. Vaggie watched on unimpressed as the penguin waddled over to her and served her as well. You're really playing up the Mary Poppins vibe, Vaggie said, finally interrupting the silence. Mary Poppins? Rosie asked. Who in the world is she? Never mind, Vaggie replied as she picked up her sandwich and began eating it again. Anyway, Rosie said, picking up a sandwich of her own and beginning to munch on it as well. What shall we do next? The penguin familiar called out a suggestion. What a great idea, Mildred, Rosie said. We shall get you fitted and go shopping for new dresses at my emporium. Can we eat first? Vaggie retorted. Of course, Rosie said without missing a beat as she picked up a sandwich. I mean when we're done, silly. Vaggie rolled her eyes and continued to eat. Rosie quietly did the same until all the food was eaten. There we are, Rosie said once the last sandwich was eaten. All full. Praying that she forgot about shopping, Vaggie stood up, walked towards the door, and said, I don't know about you, but I feel like a siesta. A line of penguin familiars assembled in front of the door, blocking Vaggie's path. Rosie chided. We must get you fitted. But I have plenty of dresses back at the hotel, Vaggie protested. Why do I need more? You need a dress for more than a few occasions, dear, Rosie replied as she stood up and walked towards Vaggie's direction. I have no money to shop at your overpriced emporium, Vaggie argued. Can't you just get Alastor to go to the hotel and pick up my other clothes? Rosie scoffed and said, You are not wearing those filthy, disgusting rags anymore. Alastor has already paid me in advance for any dress you might need. No need to worry. There are perks to being a rich man's wife. Now come along. My car is waiting out front. Do I have to? Vaggie whined as Rosie took her arm and began walking with her out of the room while the penguins parted to let them through. Let's go, dear, Rosie said, ignoring Vaggie's protest as the two exited the room.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!